Good morning, everyone. Thank you. We want to welcome you all to the 2022 AFP Orange County Giving USA and Perspectives on Philanthropy, presented by CCS Fundraising. My name is Dominic Mumlo, and I'm the current president of AFPOC and serving happily, and would encourage you, if you are not an AFP member, first of all, there are a number of us in the room. I would encourage you to reach out and talk to people about that, but we also have a table out there in the lobby if you would like to find out more about what that means. I would encourage you to join because there are a lot of benefits for our profession, particularly for the institutions for which we serve. It's so good to be back together in person for this event. I know we had a cancellation of 2020's event, and last year was partially in person and partially virtual. We're all here today. This is great. We've done a lot of work to slightly redesign the event so that it is beneficial to you. And with regards to that, I'd like to introduce to you our this year's event chair and our 2023 chapter president. Good luck. Kyle Holton, ladies and gentlemen.
Good luck indeed. Good morning, everyone. So today's event will comprise two sessions. During our morning session, you'll be hearing from CCS Fundraising Principal and Managing Director Chris Looney as he gives a summary of the 2022 Giving USA report. And you'll also be hearing from a panel of distinguished nonprofit board members, a panel that we're really excited to hear from this year, and a panel composition that we've actually never done before. During the afternoon session, Chris Looney will be giving a more focused summary of CCS's philanthropic landscape study. During this session, you'll also be hearing from a panel of funders from our local Orange County community as they comment on the good that we should be cultivating coming out of the last 2 years and everything that the last 2 years have comprised. Now, none of this would be possible without the partnership of our sponsors. So first, we'd like to recognize our presenting sponsor, CCS Fundraising, a fundraising firm from which Chris Looney, our moderator and presenter, hails from this morning. We'd also like to thank our friends at OneOC, a nonprofit devoted to accelerating nonprofit success here in our Orange County community. We'd also like to thank the Orange County Community Foundation, the local foundation partnering with generous individuals, families, and businesses to fulfill their philanthropic objectives. We'd also like to thank West America Communications, a marketing firm which helps your organization grow by transforming your communication. We'd like to thank Given, who will help your nonprofit become set up to accept cryptocurrency securely and effectively. And finally, we'd like to thank our friends here at the City National Grove of Anaheim, the venue within which we have the privilege of gathering today and where we will be holding our National Philanthropy Day event in November of this year. Without any further ado now, would you allow me to introduce today's speaker and moderator, Chris Looney. Chris was born into fundraising as the son of two of the nation's most respected development professionals. Many of you here know who those are. He credits his parents for his introduction to professional fundraising, and soon after joining CCS, Chris met his wife, Anisha, while working on a campaign. Not long after that, Anisha, too, was raising money professionally on behalf of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So to say fundraising is a family affair is an understatement. Now approaching 3 decades at CCS Fundraising, Chris has advised and counseled hundreds of clients, serving as a thought and action partner and always focused on driving philanthropy forward. So would you please join me in welcoming Chris?
I need to bring Kyle with me wherever I go. That was an awesome introduction. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here. Thanks to all the sponsors. Thanks for our panelists for their time. This is always a highlight of the year for me, getting the opportunity to gather with everyone, to reflect on philanthropy, and to learn learn from panelists, learn from all of you, and take stock of where we are in our philanthropic marketplace, and try to do a little bit of evaluating about where we're going and the things we might expect in the future. So I'm hopeful that that will be a part of your day today, that there'll be some opportunities for learning, some opportunities for growth. So let's get into it. You got way more of an introduction than I expected about me and about CCS. So we'll just move forward and thank our amazing panel of board members that we have assembled today. We'll bring them up in just a minute after I walk through some of the Giving USA findings from this current year's report. But Jenny, Alex, Wing, and Sona, I look forward to introducing you and hearing more from all of you, and thank you for being here. So without further ado, let's jump into some of those important findings from the Giving USA annual report. Coincidentally, after this event, I go to the airport to fly to Minnesota for the annual board meeting for Giving Institute and Giving USA Foundation, the group that puts this report together, and has done so for nearly 70 years. And they take very seriously their role in providing important intelligence to the philanthropic community. It's a great group, and a lot of effort is put forward in bringing these numbers to you, and I hope they provide some value to you. But importantly, the key takeaway, or one of them, is that philanthropy continues to show strength in America, as it has over the past several years. The pandemic, the choppiness of the markets, all of these things are contributing factors, but philanthropy has remained strong, has continued to grow, and that's fantastic. Nearly $500 billion. Wouldn't surprise me if in 2023, next year, we learn that philanthropy exceeded $500 billion for the first time. We're knocking on that door right now. But the challenge, as we know, for the last 6 months for sure, and over the last year, has been inflation. And despite the gain that we saw in philanthropy year over year with the impact of inflation, giving was nearly flat in inflation-adjusted dollars. So we have to measure or restrain ourselves from celebrating too much, because we are barely keeping pace with inflation. And I'm sure our clients, for the organizations that are serving them, would want more for us than to barely keep pace with inflation. So that's not great news. I think the other concerning factor that we see, and I'm sorry to be such a downer when the number is so significant, though, is that what we're seeing is dollars up, but donors down. What do I mean by that? We're seeing more money being contributed to philanthropy, to organizations, but it's coming from fewer donors each and every year. And maybe you're seeing that experience or that trend in your own organizations, where the annual fund had fewer donors this year versus last year. And that's probably the most concerning trend that we've been seeing over the last several years, and where the greatest amount of our work needs to be put. How do we rebuild philanthropy to the point where we're creating opportunities and mechanisms for donors of all sizes to participate, so that we can see all Americans, regardless of their philanthropic or their financial capacity, making gifts to philanthropy. So the fact that we have a higher average gift is great, except if it comes from fewer and fewer donors, it's a troubling trend. So something we're absolutely going to need to pay attention to and remedy in the years ahead. So I expect to hear a lot more about it and see a lot more information about it as we move forward. On this slide, what I wanted to highlight is, especially for those that are relatively new to philanthropy, is that individuals do, of course, make up the lion's share of giving in America. The Giving USA report references 67% of all giving coming from individuals. And that's great, right? But it doesn't actually tell the full picture of individual giving. Bequests are gifts from individuals, of course, so we add that percent to individual giving. And of the foundation giving at 19%, about half of that is coming from family foundations, from donor-advised funds, from other donors that would consider themselves to be individuals, family offices, you name it. So we're talking about 85 to 90% of all giving coming from individuals, not merely 67%. But I did want to make some observations about these numbers that are helpful. One is that bequest giving did decline year over year. Part of that is that there was a very significant jump in bequest giving last year. So it's natural to see a bit of a decline here and there year over year. But corporate giving, my goodness, was up about 18%. And I think we can all make sense of that. Pre-tax corporate profits were up significantly. The market was doing well, so corporations felt a little better about their capacity to support philanthropy and the charitable sector. So that was a highlight or a trend that we saw, the increase of corporate giving. Going into this year and next year, we'll see some reversals, I would expect, with some of the challenges in profitability of corporations. So that corporate number is likely to dip from the levels that it achieved this particular year. So nothing there incredibly surprising. Mega gifts, I think people are always interested in the impact of mega gifts, you know, those 8, 9, 10-figure type gifts, the $1 billion contribution to charity from a donor, the MacKenzie Scott effect, right? It was about $15 billion coming from mega gifts to charity this past year. So in the context of a $500 billion charitable marketplace, it's not absurd. It's very significant, don't get me wrong, but everyone is anticipating with the aging population, the intergenerational transfer of wealth, that these mega gifts, bequest giving will accelerate next year and into the foreseeable future. But mega gifts did not sort of negatively influence the totals this year, as they have. When I say negatively, I mean overemphasize sort of giving because of one enormous gift. That wasn't the case this past year. What's encouraging, at least from the numbers last year, is that of the 10 subsectors that are measured in philanthropy, and you can see them on the screen. Hopefully I can't see it, but it looks like you can see it. 6 of them did grow. And I always hope for growth across the full spectrum of philanthropy, but there are always gyrations as people have preferences, as economic events influence certain giving patterns of Americans. The breakdown here is interesting because we continue to see the strongest sector being religion. At 27%, many that haven't been around philanthropy for a long time would say, wow, amazing. It wasn't long ago that I was reporting out to an audience like this, the giving to the religious sector at 33, 34, 35%. So it's not increasing, it's declining pretty precipitously in a short amount of time, and it's going to other places. It's going to donor-advised funds. It's going to other priorities in the philanthropic sector. But it is concerning, of course, for congregations to be receiving less of the share of philanthropy in America, and probably one of the reasons we're reporting fewer gifts is fewer people are finding themselves in worship spaces on a more regular basis. But what I was encouraged to see is that areas like the arts and the environment rebounded. And that's encouraging from my perspective. And it has a lot to do, I think, with the reemergence of in-person events and those kinds of situations. So very good to see some of those sectors that were hit hard, even healthcare being one, hit hard last year, rebound and show greater strength. So just a couple of additional thoughts, and then we'll get the panel to come up. On this slide, we see year-over-year changes, and I'm heartened to know that foundations continue to be generous, of course, but more importantly, that they are following some of the same giving patterns now at this stage in our pandemic life that they were providing during the earlier days of the pandemic, more flexibility, more giving to unrestricted needs of an organization. And I'm hopeful that some of those more lax restrictions will continue going forward, but I also know that it's going to be very easy for many foundations to fall back into those patterns of lengthy application times, more restricted purposes, and I think it's on the charitable sector to keep up the pressure of foundations to be continually giving money away that allows an organization that flexibility to meet its greatest needs in the moment and more urgently. So that's one interesting thing to keep mindful of as we look to the future. The last two slides are really just meant to highlight two trends that are changing the face of philanthropy. One being the growth and the continued acceleration of giving into and giving out of donor-advised funds. We recorded last year that grant making increased at national charities by 23%, community foundations by 33%, single-issue charities by 33%. So the donor-advised fund impact is certainly resulting in greater distribution of gifts from donor-advised funds, which is great. But there is certainly the effect, too, of donor-advised funds growing significantly, where a pretty hefty percentage of those funds are not getting put to use, at least not immediately. And that's causing lots of conversations about what additional restrictions or policies need to be put in place to at least assure that a certain limited or a certain minimal amount of money that's going into these donor-advised funds is coming out of them in a reasonable time frame. So expect to see a lot more discussion in Washington about how DAFs might be more in line with foundations, institutional type foundations, and their restrictions as well. But it's a conversation that we'll continue to follow and pursue because it's changing the face of philanthropy, the amount that's being given into them. Lastly, the movement toward more work in the equity and justice space has certainly impacted philanthropy positively, seeing more money being given away, especially in the foundation realm, toward efforts that are considered to be focused around justice and equity issues, but also to those organizations that are demonstrating a greater appreciation for those issues, not just in terms of the programs that they offer to the community, but the way the organization itself looks, and the board members that it recruits, and the engagement that it has with the broader community. So I have no doubt in my mind that the issues of justice and equity are only going to accelerate in philanthropy and become more and more front and center for philanthropists and the organizations they support to deal with, to reckon with, to make adjustments around, and I'm excited to see that change happen. So let's see what our panelists think of all that. We are so fortunate to have an incredible group of board members, philanthropists, community leaders joining us today. I'll invite you all to come up. So Jenny, Alex, Wing, and Sona, if I could ask you to come on up and join us at the table. And while you're coming up, let me introduce them to you all. And then we'll give them a big round of applause and big welcome to Anaheim at the Grove. So let me go, to my notes, and let's start first with Sona, because Sona is coming up on the stage. Sona, welcome. Just for all of you to know, Sona is the founder and chief empowerment officer of My Private Professor, an impact-driven educational services company that collaborates with organizations to offer personalized on-demand tutoring services and gives back with every tutoring hour to support students in underserved communities. Notably, Sona has been a leader in the philanthropic space on boards and currently is the president of the Tustin Public Schools Foundation and also a longtime board member of Orangewood Foundation and the founder of Inspire Philanthropy Fund. So warm welcome to Sona, please, everyone. I'll come back and introduce Alex Kim. Alex is the founder and principal of Three Kings Public Affairs, a government, business, and community affairs consulting company helping with clients accessing the government and providing outreach to community leaders in Southern California region. He's also co-principal of Windfall Strategies, LLC, which specializes in business marketing consulting for domestic and international businesses. And importantly, Alex has served on several state commissions, also government committees for the Orange County District Attorney. And in his spare time, a laundry list of community organizations for which he serves on the board, including the Titan Institute, PBS SoCal KCET, the Asian Business Association of Orange County Asian Pacific Islander Community Alliance, Korean American Coalition of Los Angeles, Vietnamese American Chamber of Commerce in Orange County, Asian Pacific American Public Affairs Association, Orange County chapter. I don't know where he fits all the time in his day to do that. But Alex, welcome, and everybody please welcome Alex on our behalf. And next I get to introduce Jenny Dinnen. All right, Jenny. Jenny is the co-owner and president of MacKenzie Corporation. And what has been fun for me is that I actually had the opportunity to serve with Jenny on the board of Girls Inc. of Orange County before Jenny cycled off and found other organizations to impact and boards to work with. You are currently on the board of Team Kids, right? The board of Leadership Tomorrow, and a mentor through Chapman University, the Business School Board of Counselors, right? So everybody please welcome Jenny. And we have with us Wing Lam. Welcome, Wing. So Wing is the eldest of three founding brothers and the wildly enigmatic character and recognized as the face of the iconic Wahoo's brand, right? And someone that we see very frequently show up in our feeds for LinkedIn and other things, always out there in the community, working hard, doing good. I think he even wore his Ronald McDonald House socks today to show his support, right? Yeah, all right, there you go. But in his, there you go, that's right. Importantly, Wing serves and has served on various boards, including Share Our Strength, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, Surfrider Foundation, an active member of the Asian American Journalists Association, and the list goes on. And I'll have them talk a little bit about some of their work in the community right now. Why don't we do that? Just real quickly, and we know, we've trained, we've practiced, we know the answers have to be short in order to make sure we get at the information. But Wing, why don't you briefly tell us some of the most impactful work that you're doing today as you serve the community?
Currently, is the speaker on? There it goes. I've been literally running around with back to school stuff. I mean, literally, if you see the big gigantic Sprinter van there, it's not just for fun because it's actually picking up computer monitors, dry erase boards, you name it, backpacks and all that for, I think we dropped off to Orangewood and Thomas House this week. And it just goes on and on. So between, this crazy group of friends that I started at California Love Drop, so Charles Antis and all the other local nonprofit guys, So that's taken a lot more work because I used to spend a lot more time planning for events, but we're slowly kind of getting back in that groove. So we just done a few golf tournaments, a few get lists, but basically I'm out delivering school supplies and meals.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. And Jenny, what are you up to these days in your board service? What activities are you focused on?
What activities? Well, right now, I think that, one, I loved your presentation on all the data. As a data nerd, I love all that. But and I was so intrigued about the individual giving of what that was. So with Team Kids, it really is about empowering youth and the next generation and changing the perception of what philanthropists look like. So before, it was giving these mega gifts. So all my notes were about that mega gift. If you think philanthropist, I have to give a ton of money, and that's what philanthropy is. So it's really like changing the perspective of what philanthropists look like. And I think that's just a cool thing. So at Team Kids, all about empowering youth, but really bringing the community together. I'm all about trying to figure out, I love what you guys are doing, of bringing different community organizations together to empower the kids, but redefine what giving looks like, serving looks like, and philanthropy looks like. So I think that's a big answer, but
that's great.
Changing the world.
That's right. Yeah. Sona, what about you? What's your current focus and the priorities that you're working on in the charitable sector?
I appreciate that. I just wanted to say thank you, Chris, for inviting us, and we're grateful to be on the panel. Thank you for the wine. I think we're all 2 glasses in, so you're going to get some really great answers here.
It's going to be a nice lunch.
No, it's been such a dream come true to be able to be part of wonderful organizations that are in alignment with our values. And so being part of Tustin Public Schools Foundation has been wonderful because, we have children, and our children are in the school district, so that's a little bit personal. But we do see the disparity that exists between schools within the same district. And I know that's not just isolated to Tustin Unified, it's throughout the country. And so to be able to make a mark in trying to try to solve that issue so that all students get the resources they need is something that I feel passionately about. And with respect to Orangewood Foundation, that's just a wonderful organization that helps students and youth across the board. I'm grateful to have been involved and just to see the comprehensive nature of what they do to try to provide support for youth. So I'm excited about that.
That's great. And Alex, what about you? What's on your list this summer for your work in the community?
Well, it's pretty, oh wow, this is pretty loud here. Definitely, well, thank you to the AFP for inviting me to speak about this. And I definitely want to highlight one of the slides before I begin is the trend of more increasing giving in the racial equity space. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the nonprofits I've been involved with that you mentioned come from both the small business minority communities, but also the social service providing agencies. And what's been happening is you have, of course, we had the COVID pandemic, and hopefully it's winding down, but we're seeing different trends happening, is the effect upon the small business communities and the impact of the closures for having those that were not considered essential services, and definitely a high impact with the minority business communities as well. So we're definitely having a lot of conversations. Of course, we already know about how the federal government provided SBA loans or grants, different states across the country providing their own loans, business loans. And so we're still going through that. So we just had a meeting with Governor Gavin Newsom's office in providing additional loans, providing to COVID recovery that's still continuing. Mm-hmm. But also from the nonprofit, the social services side, and this not just across Asian American or Pacific Islanders, but all minorities, including veteran disabled communities, where we're having continuous discussions about additional grants, and just highlighting the that's connected from the pandemic is the anti-Asian hate that's been happening. A lot of targeted hate upon not only to women and elderly, especially, but also to small businesses too. Mm. So this is where we're seeing a lot of movement where traditionally you don't have business chambers and nonprofits, at least in the minority space, working together, right? Because you have this polarization that happens between both left and right. but they're joining together in understanding that hate affects everyone, not just the businesses or minority groups. So the nail salon industries, continuing to receive hate calls and people coming in. Some of my clients that are nonprofits that we have, people that's barging in and say, get out of the country. That still continues to this day. Yeah. So we're receiving funding from our government leaders on helping to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Well, you answered two questions in one. One sort of about the work that you're doing that is so important, and secondly, something that you found being a trend that is particularly meaningful to this community, but communities across the country. And I would ask Sona, and then we'll go down, like, what was a key takeaway for you when you reflect on the information that you heard and the numbers that you heard around philanthropy?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think one thing that I found that was quite significant is I was surprised that the donations for the education sector had gone down since the year before. I feel like we all know that through COVID, it's really had a deleterious impact on students and families trying to handle teaching and learning online with this hybrid model, and especially impacts underrepresented students and students of color. And I feel like in the education space that I'm in, we saw an unprecedented number of organizations, employers, families reaching out to us because they really felt like students were struggling and they were trying to find a solution to be able to help students through COVID and even beyond that. So I was actually a little surprised that we hadn't seen, it sounded almost counterintuitive that we didn't get the funding, as much funding towards education as I would have expected.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because that number in education is inflated by higher education, philanthropy. And so if you were to parse out the funding that's available or that is coming in for public education in the pre-K to 12 grade space, I think you'd find it's increasing, but I think you'd be saddened by how small it really is on a global perspective. So it would be nice if we could really dissect some of those subsectors even further to know what the share of the pie is for higher education versus public education and other entities, because we know that public schools get a very small percentage of philanthropy, but growing, and hopefully that trend will continue with your good work. Jenny, what were some surprises to you, or a surprise that's going to sit with you for a while? And
I think the same thing I kind of had mentioned earlier, that the individual giving, it is surprising to me that it went down. I think that so many people right now are hungry to be a part of something. They're hungry to be a part of a community. They're hungry to be part of something. And I thought that I had in other studies that I'd seen of just seeing some of the smaller gives that are happening, right? Of like how easy it is to be giving and some of this. So I thought the number would be higher for that individual give, because you just see these smaller communities, and I just think it cannot be overlooked. Creating a community of people together, and what are they a part of? So I guess I was just surprised I thought with this kind of next generation and as many people are in there and giving and doing, that it would be a smaller amount, but there'd be more people. So
yeah,
I'm kind of just curious to dig into that because I think it's something we can't discount, is that group.
That's right. Well, it is interesting, and I think you landed on something, the factor of engagement, the power of engagement. And in the work that you're doing, you probably see great engagement, but maybe nationally the engagement levels that you're seeing aren't as strong in other communities, and partly maybe due to the pandemic or other priorities. But I think that is one of the ways that we're going to overcome the decrease in donor counts, is getting people more engaged in community efforts. Yeah. Wing, what about you? What was a takeaway for you? Did you see anything there that surprised you?
Well, I think, overall, just finding the sectors, like when we talk about, board makeup, having diversity, because if you happen to, in the last 2 years, have a good chunk of your big donors be in the construction, in the auto, right? You hit it out of the park. Or even up until maybe 6 months ago, the mortgage industry. I mean, I think we're going to see a little shift right now. But a bunch of our friends, they just came back from Stars and Stripes down in Cabo. It was their 25th anniversary, and they literally raised over $5 million. And again, I would say 99% of that came from the construction side of the world, because I know a lot of my friends that were down there, and they were literally throwing money like it was water, right? And you don't see that at a big charity event unless, you know, they're really killing it, right? So we're gonna get a reset button on that pretty quickly, but if you happen to be a part of that, you know, charity event, you got a really big windfall this year.
Yeah, that's great. Ah, that's so true. Jenny, I'll start mixing and matching a little bit, but I do want all of you to answer this. Jenny, we'll start with you. What's one of the lessons, the great lessons that you've learned out of your board service? Like what have you sort of come to understand through the organizations that you worked with and being a board member?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it's tough.
Overall lessons. I mean, there's so much amazing, I don't know, ness that comes out of becoming, like kind of behind the curtains of being a part of an organization and really seeing how it works, what happens, whatnot. What are some of the lessons learned? I think that some of the, maybe this is kind of around, but I think setting expectations, so I think it's a little bit a different question, but I think where it has been successful is setting expectations about what I'm looking for, what they're looking for, where the needs align.
That's good.
And really, what do they see as successful, of what do they want out of their board? And now, I mean, where I am now and kind of the different groups that I've been a part of, when there's an alignment of what I want to be giving, using my time, what's going on, then it's incredible and it's amazing. So I think really having an alignment of what they're looking for from me, what I'm willing and able to give based on where I'm at, and having that alignment, I think has been amazing. I think, yeah, I'll stop there for a second.
No, that's great. I think that's critical to have that mutual understanding of what it is that you are able to do and want to do, and what the organization needs you to do creates some great traction and advancement. Alex, what about you? What's a lesson that you've learned from your board service?
Yes, definitely from my experience, starting from high school, actually. You know, as you see my little bio there, I think I'm a board addict. You know, if you have that sickness, you know, the willingness to volunteer is such a very, I guess, nurturing thing. You know, we've heard in mental health studies how giving releases oxytocin in your brain and these things that make you feel good. And from my experience in working probably over 30 different boards, participating since high school, so it doesn't seem too many. It's something I noticed to have, I noticed two different personalities that pretty much, I won't say determine the calmness or the less chaos nature of a very active board member is, you know, if you're an active participant on the board versus being a passive board member, right? And the whole spectrum in between. And you know, that's something that I've noticed that really makes a big difference in a very happy organization or unhappy. I mean, this extends to different, you know, types of organizations, not just nonprofit groups. And I think that's something that a good leader would nice to, you know, learn how to manage, but also what I've learned, you know, most recently, and I'm also coming here, it wasn't stated, but I used to also be a corporate philanthropist for Southern California Gas Company. I don't know if there's any SoCal Gas folks in the audience or in the corporate utility power industry, but I've learned from that level of learning the very important nature to also give other people a chance to also term out. If you have people that, you know, we do appreciate the veterans that have the long experience and how to do it correctly where you don't offend them if you need to bring more new people. Especially generational diversity has been a big factor in a lot of the nonprofit organizations I've been in, to keeping track of what the incoming new generation needs are. They're very distinct level, and you know, whether you're a baby boomer, millennial, the greatest generation, Gen Y coming in, Gen Z. So that's something that's important to be cognizant of, to make sure that diversity represents in different age groups as well, and different communication styles.
Yeah, that's really important. I always reflect on the importance of diversity in a board, age, gender, all different factors. And then that, you said it, the opportunity for people to step off gracefully and for new blood to come into an organization with fresh ideas, fresh energy, and to really be a spark of creativity and action. Wing, in your service to boards, what lessons have you come away with? What would you want to share with a younger board member as a mentor to them if you were asked?
Well, like I said, when we talk about the diversity, right, I use like Surfrider Foundation because I sat on there for about 10 years. You had the environmentalists on one side and you had the money guys on the other. So I sat on the money side of the equation, and we were always battling because somebody that would want to donate money happened to have quote unquote plastic containers that we wanted to keep away from the beach.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you can't take the money without the product, right? So it was this constant like, hey, the balance, right?
The balance.
Because we want to solve the cleaning of the oceans and all that issue, but we need money to do it, right? So it's a constant like the struggle, I call it, right? So in the end, you find a happy medium that say, hey, we'll take the money with kind of these restrictions, we're going to call it, right?
Yep.
So the donor is still happy with the outcome. His brand is being represented, but it's also, helping us, solve the issue. So it's always a struggle.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I don't think we often think enough about the struggle or the tension between different constituencies within an organization or even among board members or clients that an organization might serve. So it can be a very tense and difficult dance, I guess, for any executives and other board members to perform. Sona, what about you? What are lessons and takeaways for you?
So I've been grateful to have learned a lot as a board member for the years that I've done this. And I think one of the things that I can share is that I think, like all of us as board members, we have the passion and we're excited and in alignment with the organizations with which we're affiliated. But at the end of the day, we're all volunteers. And most of us have fixed term limits. And so what I've really realized is that one of the true assets of these nonprofits is honestly, it's the staff. I think if we can give more deference to the executive director and the teams that are here, they have the knowledge base, they have the experience, the longevity to actually see things through. I feel like as board members, our role could be more of a, provide the strategy and guidance as needed, and then honestly get out of the way and let them shine and do their thing. That's something that I've seen.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, you found the right audience for that. Being largely made up of staff of nonprofits out there, they appreciate that because I'm sure they've all had their challenges saying, I just wish the board member would let me do my job, right? Let me coach you, don't coach me, right? For sure. We've all had those tensions.
Chris, can I it's funny actually, I was just chatting with Angie, I don't know where she is here, but for Team Kids, and I just said, is it too much when these marketing committees, and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to take on the world, and we do all of these things and all of this, and we have all of these grand ideas as board members. And so it's like setting those, kind of goes back to those expectations of how to leverage outside perspective, but then setting those expectations, I think, up front of this is how we can use it, this is what we can do, and that enthusiasm. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, I think that a really big thing for board, what I've learned and kind of getting off of some boards, but is the pathway to get on a board. I mean, I think the best thing at Girls Inc. was that the women auxiliary group, I can't remember what it was. I know there's a Dads for Daughters group that happens of what are these pathways that it doesn't just have to be, and I think you've mentioned it the other day, it doesn't just have to be being on a board. Right. So like what are these pathways up and or what are pathways on the other side of things to keep people involved? So like what are these different paths? Because I know that you're involved with like a million organizations, and we do a lot with other organizations, and we might not have to be on a board, but then we can be connected with them. So creating pathways, I know this is a board panel, but there's other ways to get people involved than just being on the board.
No, it's such a good takeaway. I mean, we struggle or think that the way to engagement is board membership, but a lot of people don't want to be on
it's a huge
board.
commitment.
Maybe they don't want the fiduciary responsibility, maybe they don't want the giving expectation, but they want to help. They want to be involved. So having those support groups and other opportunities is so important. Well, let's move to a different question, which is around the theme of our event today, which is cultivating the good coming out of the pandemic. So obviously we've been in a unique situation as human beings for the last couple of years, but there's always good that comes out of any situation, or you hope to find the good that comes out of a situation. So Alex, if we could start with you and we'll just go on down, like what have you, in relation to the community, the board service, the organizations, what good have you seen come out of the last couple of years?
Well, certainly the pandemic has affected everybody, and especially hard hitting the nonprofit organizations where we couldn't fundraise the way we used to, right? I mean, one of the boards, for example, the Orange County API Community Alliance, our bread and butter was doing our food and wine festival. That's how we're able to have good partners with different small businesses, restaurants to provide the food, and we raised a lot of money that way. And fortunately, we were able to have last year to have one, as the pandemic slowly decreased. And it was an outdoor event and things. So it made us think how to do things virtually, just having regular board meetings, right? We all were in the Zoom universe. And we've learned the benefits to also how to manage our money well using technology. And I'm sure you're all familiar where we had, including our headquarters building, we had 2 different satellite offices, and we had to, we asked ourselves, what do we value in our organization, right? And we valued our employees, our staff. And in order to keep our staff going to provide our mission of providing the best social services to 19 different distinct cultures in Orange County, from Asian Pacific, Latino, Middle Eastern, and the Latino communities. How do we do that? So we decided to keep our staff and let go of the leases of our 2 satellite offices. And you notice in the different lectures about real estate how the office space market was affected because you can't go in the office. So companies are letting go of their leases because it was just too expensive to maintain, right? But they value their staff because it accomplishes the goal of doing your whatever the mission of the corporation is or the nonprofit is. So, but we learned that we're still able to provide the same level of service. We just rotated our people from doing remote work, but if they needed to meet, still needed to meet our clients, some that are homeless and those that are low income, to meet at headquarters, but plan it well, where we're still able to still fulfill our mission. So that's something where we're learning, balancing technology for our advantage, and now we continue to do that. So we don't need extra locations.
That's right.
For now.
That's great. Yeah, I think that flexibility, the lesson that you can still thrive in multiple different types of environments, an in-person, a virtual, right? You can provide services in different ways, understanding that the way that we were locked into doing things before doesn't have to be the path forward. That's so true. What about you, Sona? What was a lesson, outcome of this pandemic era for you?
So I would echo what Alex just shared, and I think that the silver lining of the pandemic is that it really did cause nonprofits to take a closer look at their sources of funding. And so for so many organizations, it's very event-driven, galas and lunches and races. And I think that it forced nonprofits to think outside the box and get creative, because they really did need to continue to serve the individuals that they were supporting, and they just had to find new ways. So for Tustin Public Schools Foundation, for example, many of you may know that our biggest fundraiser is the Dino Dash, and that's where we're running at the Tustin Marketplace every year. And we had to shift into a model in which we had a virtual race, and we had people basically submit their times online, and they got mailed a little, plaque at the end. That's not ideal, but it helped us continue. Right. And likewise for Orangewood Foundation, a lot of what we do is with galas to get people engaged and the support. And what I loved was one of the galas was virtual, and for the sponsors, they got really creative. They sent us a centerpiece, they sent us a little meal box. We got to connect with everybody virtually and participate in an online auction, and I felt like they kept the engagement. So I feel like this is something with the diversification of funding streams is something that we will continue to use as momentum as we increase our repertoire.
Perfect. Perfect. Jenny?
I love that. I will say I've been blown away by all the nonprofits that I've worked with or been around of the innovation in programming that's happened. I mean, it's unbelievable, the programming that you guys have put on and what you've done and how you've done. And I think that then using that same ingenuity or whatnot for moving over on the donor side of things and the fund development of, I mean, it's incredible, like the out-of-the-box thinking and what we can do and where we are, and for programming that I've seen that I think should stay, and now flipping the switch there on fund development of what that is, of what do people want. They want experiential, they want different engagement, they want that community, and so leaning into that, I think is a really big thing. I think people, also I've seen people getting closer to the mission, which I think is a really big thing, and like seeing that happen of where it is and what it is. I know, Kyle, we had kind of talked about that of like how to bring people in, and I've seen a lot more of that instead of maybe the big type of events. How do we bring people in so they can feel it, touch it, and be a part of it? I've seen a lot more of that.
That's great. Great. Anything to add, Wing?
Well, let's see. Pre-pandemic, we loved doing the big blood drive. That shut down, so we teamed up, and to date, I think we did 75 local blood drives in Irvine with Charles Anthus. So again, we had to spin, had to adjust, right? So the whole thing was about trying to be creative. So at the same time as the pandemic hit, Ronald McDonald House was about 10 million in to their 13.5 that they needed. So everything stopped. So Charles came up to me and goes, how funny would it be to have the taco guy become the face of the campaign? And I looked at him and goes, isn't that going to piss off all the local franchisees? And goes, well, they're not doing anything. And I'm like, okay. So in the last 2 years, at the end of 2021, we finished raising the balance of the 3.5 million,
That's
right?
That's right.
So I'm still supporting it because, so it's all about, you know, and the thing that, which happened here too, the American Red Cross had their Heroes Lunch here about a month ago, and Wendy Birch was a fill-in, I guess, MC because somebody else got sick right before. So Wendy and I hadn't seen each other in years since she was a field reporter, and I'm going to give you guys a little piece here. She's now the head of community relations for this station, a brand new position. Don't tell her I gave you guys the intel, okay? So the first thing she did after we reconnected at the luncheon, she goes, there's this whole homeless issue happening, and we're kind of overseeing all the stuff, right? So is there something that we can do to kind of bring awareness to the people trying to solve the issue as opposed to just the homeless issue? Because we're kind of tired of seeing all that stuff, like the negative side of it. So we goes, well, the same thing that I've been doing. We talked about how we, since the pandemic started, being able to help the volunteers. So they gave me a laundry list of stuff, and I'm short of a couple of things right now, but we're gonna end up with 3 segments on the news in one day, going to 3 different rescue missions in downtown LA, because our team has all the resources. So with one phone call, we got this, that, and that. So again, for you guys, I'm telling you what's happening. On camera, it's going to look amazing because that's what they want. They want to look, oh my God, kumbaya, we're all happy. Behind the scenes, we know it's still a struggle. But for that one moment, we're going to give everybody a little hope that we're still trying to solve this issue. It's not going anywhere, but we're going to do our best.
Amazing. Amazing. That's great. I love that. That passion, and what I've heard is just a lot of the creativity, flexibility, nimbleness to just meet the problem head on and find solutions, which I think we're all capable of doing better now. So we're at time, but I want to ask one more question, and maybe I'll throw it up to anyone who wants to answer it, and that's just about advice. You're all board members. the audience largely is or works closely with board members and is always trying to unlock people's generosity, people's activity and engagement. What advice would you give these practitioners of philanthropy, these fundraisers, about engaging board members, people like you? What advice would you give? Anybody want to volunteer? Sona, would you
Sure.
take us out, or
Sure.
anyone else?
Sure. I think that, engagement of board members is an interesting topic. Obviously, everyone wants to get people as involved as they can. And I think that a lot of times we see that when there are board members to a nonprofit, they have alignment with the values of that, we presume, right? But you do see there are some board members that come in, they check the box, they show up, and they leave. And I would say, let's lean in and see, is it just because for them it's just a, tally mark, or is it really that we haven't found their passion or tapped into their unique skill set? Because I think that amongst board members, there is so many diverse professions and talents and skills. And so sometimes when we lean back and listen to, where they could focus and grow and let them lead the way in that respect. So if they're interested in finance or they like communications, and find something and almost create something, I don't want to say create it around it because that is harder, but kind of find out where it is that their strengths are and support them in that regard, because in the end it'll end up helping the nonprofit. And I would add one more thing. Another thing that we can do, and it is tough because of time, but I would recommend that we take the time and the space to create opportunities for board members to get to know each other, and board members to also get to know the staff. Because I think a lot of times for many organizations, you come to a board meeting, you vote, approve a couple motions, and you leave. And those that are really invested or on the executive committee, they're chairing something. But for a lot of them, they don't know each other as well, and they don't feel as connected to the organization's team that, again, as we talked about, is running everything, or to each other. So maybe a board meeting could save some of those, one-sided updates for an email, and instead use that collective energy when everyone's together to really start tackling an issue that is facing a nonprofit or a challenge. I think that would help with engagement.
Wonderful. That's very good advice, and I think all of us can take that and use it, which is wonderful. Anything else to add, Jenny?
No, I just, yes, of using board meetings to not just review everything that's on the docket that already got sent. I mean, I don't think we're all just zoomed out. But I think that using that time to say, this is what we're looking to accomplish. This is what we're looking to you guys for. Like, don't feel bad asking. I mean, we're there, and most people that are on boards want to help and want to give. So like, hey, listen, this is the topic that we're covering. This is what we want to dig into. Like, we all can read the notes ahead of time of what that is. So I think just
Wonderful.
Using us. I mean, we're there because we want to be
That's
not
wonderful.
used, but leveraged. I'll use a better
Thank you.
word.
Well, I'm getting the hook because it's time for lunch. Alex, Sona, Jenny, Wing, thank you. That was wonderful. Everyone, let's give them a wonderful round of applause for being up here and guiding us and giving us some good advice. And part two promises to be just as exciting and educational as the first session. I've got some different data to report on, excitingly. How boring would that be if I came back at you after lunch and gave you the same information that I gave you during the morning. So we will first start off by just acknowledging and thanking our afternoon group of panelists. And we have with us Nate, Raida, Heather, and Sarah, who I will introduce in just a minute. But I just wanted to thank them as funders themselves and community activists for being here, joining us, giving of their time, and giving their insights to us as well, because we need good information and good strategy to help us do a better job of seeking support from funders like these organizations represent and have access to. So thank you, panelists, for joining us. I am going to share with you a little bit of information about a survey that CCS conducted over several months ago, but over several months. And the goal and idea was to get an understanding of how the pandemic was impacting the philanthropic market space, the work of our clients and our friends, and what some of the trends were that were being seen and were being expected in the marketplace. And I wanted to share that with you because I think the trends are very valid and appropriate and will maybe inform some of the conversations that we have this afternoon together. So let me just share a few of those thoughts and ideas with you. And this is not just 30 organizations that responded to this. It was over 500 organizations represented that responded to this survey. And the challenges that were referenced, the top 3 of them, focused around donor acquisition, donor retention, and stewardship, and making the ability to make data-driven decisions to guide fundraising activities. So being more analytical was number 3 on the list, but acquisition, retention being 1 and 2. And isn't it interesting that what we learned from the morning session was that retention, acquisition, getting more and more donors to give was harder and harder. We were seeing bigger gifts, but from a smaller universe of donors. So it's very consistent there, the challenges that our clients and friends are seeing in terms of acquisition and retention and what the national trends in terms of smaller numbers of donors is showing. Secondly, about 80% of the organizations that participated had received gifts from family foundations and from donor-advised funds within the last couple of years. And that wasn't true if we had surveyed these same organizations a few years prior. The experience is that appreciated assets and bequests were also the part of the experience for most of these nonprofits, but the vehicles like cryptocurrency and bargain sale gifts were not common, and probably not as common for many of you as well. But donor advised fund, family foundation gifts, increasingly important to the philanthropy of our clients and friends. And as these organizations were looking into 2022 and planning and anticipating, more than half, almost 60%, said that they were expecting very significant increases in giving from major gifts, from mid-level gifts, and from annual appeals in this particular year. What was interesting is that many were less optimistic and less confident about the giving expected from foundation sources. So a bit of a shifting expectation year over year from our clients and friends. A significant number of these organizations were planning a campaign, or either sort of re-engaging in a campaign, just coming out of a campaign, or planning for a campaign. So a campaign was very much a part of the work for nearly 2/3 of all of the clients and friends that we surveyed, which was, again, not the pulse that we had seen a year prior or 2 years prior during the height of the pandemic. It wasn't even the case that we saw 2/3 of organizations thirsting for a campaign or planning for a campaign or implementing a campaign in 2019. It was closer to half. So there's some pent-up demand in terms of campaign work. Importantly, nearly all of the participants were discussing equity, inclusion, diversity with their donors, and were incorporating that work in their strategic plans and in the evolution of their organizations, which is incredibly valuable and important, and a trend that we're sure to see continued. We also saw in the survey results that the vast majority of clients and friends had returned to in-person events, engagements of one sort or another, but at the same time had clearly incorporated the hybrid model to drive engagement in philanthropy when those opportunities were determined to be appropriate. So I anticipate that rate of flexibility and an increasing rate of return to in-person events to continue and accelerate into the end of the year, but not to the exclusion of some of those important virtual activities that you're all participating in. Some of those things that are likely to be locked in forever, we'll see, right? But very likely to be locked in forever and are very much a part of post-pandemic considerations are the virtual or hybrid events. Remote work options being important as well, and a continued focus on digital giving as being an important alternative. I think it's no surprise for all of you to see the incredible increases in digital giving over the last several years, which is only going to increase. A smaller number of checks coming in the mail, I would anticipate, right? Probably don't need to spend as much energy minding those post boxes, office boxes, December 29th, as an increasing amount of those gifts come in electronically and directly to you. So just some food for thought. More importantly is the food for thought that our panelists are going to provide. So if they're okay, allowing me to interrupt their lunch, if I could call our 4 funder panelists up to the stage, and as they come up, I'll introduce them. So come on up, Nate, Raida, Heather, and Sarah. And if you don't mind, I'm not going to waste any time. I'll provide your introduction as you're coming up. And I'll start with Nate, because Nate is leading the pack here. Nate Brown is Senior Vice President in the Newport Beach office, serving as Director of the PIMCO Foundation. And in this role, Nate oversees the firm's global philanthropic giving portfolio. Nate, thank you very much for being here. And everyone, can you please welcome Nate Brown? Next, we have Raida Namana, and Raida is a social innovation expert with decades of experience and has developed a number of initiatives in over 60 countries across the globe, building strategic multi-sectoral partnerships, robust intercultural networks, and working with senior leaders, public figures, and the community at the grassroots level. And in her current role as director of the Latino Community Foundation's Latino Giving Circle Network, Raida leads the growth and development of the largest network of Latino donors in the United States. Please help me welcome Raida. Next, we have Heather. Heather Stratman, everyone, is owner of Principal Strategic Advisors, and is a senior executive manager and advocacy consultancy with 20 years of experience in the field of local government, intergovernmental relationships, and strategic policy development. And her work has her focusing on championing policy and regulatory reform on behalf of her clients, and in those roles has helped secure millions of dollars in funding for capital and programmatic needs, as well as providing for the regulatory and legislative relief to maximize funding opportunities. So everyone, please welcome Heather. And last, we have my friend Sarah. Sarah Garsky is with First Foundation. Joined them in 2008 and is responsible for managing operations for family foundation clients and collaborating with their trusted advisors. Sarah has helped family foundations execute their philanthropic mission through strategic planning, effective grant making, and impact reporting. So everyone, please welcome Sarah. My favorite part, of course, is asking questions and trying to understand and make sense of all of the different opportunities that exist from the funder community. And what I would just sort of start off with is a question about trends and what you're seeing in the marketplace. So Nate, if you don't mind, if we could start with you and we'll head down the table. We won't always start with you, Nate. That would be unfair. So we'll mix it up. But Nate, do lead us off and kind of share with us some of the trends that you're seeing from your desk in the funder space.
Sure. Can you hear me? All right. So the first would be just a focus on trust-based giving. You know, just in fairness, you know, that was happening prior to the pandemic, but now people are actually using the language and are being intentional about it. And frankly, people like me are talking to our boards about that. So that's the first. The second is coordination. I think you know, the last 2 years have taught us in a real way that individually we can only have but so much impact. So reaching out to other funders, particularly I'm seeing a lot of coordination amongst funders of the same organization, using that as a starting point to find ways to enhance that relationship and go beyond that particular nonprofit relationship. And finally, and I know that we all are probably going to reference this, but just focused on racial equity. Now the caveat being that recent politics today have actually made language, made us a much more sensitive language to use around that. But for the last 2 years, there's certainly been very open dialogue. It used to be someone like me in the room would always have to, with caution, raise this topic, and try to help folks understand why looking at problems through a racial equity lens, can help us better mitigate that problem. But now I see that other folks who don't look like me are leading those conversations, and it's so encouraging.
That's great. Raida?
I think from the work that we're doing at the Latino Community Foundation, what we're seeing is organizations like ours providing a new infrastructure for new ways of developing philanthropy. So philanthropy, as just as any other tool to enable social innovation, needs to rethink itself. And how can we best involve the community in efforts that will allow us to understand the needs of our beneficiaries. So for example, with what we do with the Latino Giving Circle Network, what we're doing is enabling a group of philanthropists that know that the generosity is embedded in their DNA to have a decision on how they want to spend their dollars because they know what the needs of the communities are. So I think this is a trend that we're going to see more and more of. It's understanding that community needs and the community itself need to be connected in order for us to rethink philanthropy and how do we bring about better solutions for our communities. And then the other thing is, why doing this? Why thinking about new models? Well, for example, with the Latino community, less than 1.1% of all philanthropic dollars go to the Latino community. Think about that. Like, this is the largest ethnic group in California. And all over the country, less than 1.1% go to our communities. The only way to change that is creating new models, creating new ways for us to bring about the change that we want to see. And it's change, it's not charity. And that's how we like to just present the model that we're building.
That's great.
That's a great place to start off with. I think I really come at this discussion from the perspective of the nonprofit community. I work with a number of collaborative groups and lead those groups towards achieving their goals. And when I look at the trends, I really see that it is this collaborative model that drives much of the success that I'm seeing. We have so many wonderful nonprofits in our space, but typically they end up either competing against each other or they can't fulfill the larger system change model that we're actually trying to drive towards. And it is this collaborative model and getting people out of their silos that really, I think, is good for funders, and I think it's good for that community model that's so important to actually get to the change that we're looking for. And what I really see is that we have incredibly mature and sophisticated nonprofits, particularly in Orange County, but they all sort of have their own little bailiwick. And when we really think about system change, we have to drive them together to bring their greatest attributes into one space and get them to work together. And so I see it on the nonprofit side, this collaborative model drive, but I also see that pay off when we do go to funders, whether those are public or private. I dabble in both sides of it, and they like that collaborative model because it's a place where they can, I think, find a greater impact for their dollars.
I would say proactiveness, responsiveness, or collaboration and responsiveness. So in terms of proactiveness, one of the things that came out of the pandemic was really reaching out to the nonprofits, not trying to monopolize their time, but really trying to have an understanding of what is going on in the community and what are the driving needs, where can philanthropic dollars have the most impact. Collaboration, you see the collaborative model where every nonprofit has their strengths and they shouldn't try to do everything. I was recently on a site visit of STEM Next. It was a collaborative here. It's a national collaborative, but they have a local collaborative that one of my clients funded. And to actually see the energy, and each participant, it's a collaboration between Girls Inc., a couple of Boys and Girls Club of Garden Grove and Huntington Valley, STEM Next, and 4-H. And to actually see the synergy of the room and how it translated into the excitement of the kids where they're learning coding and building robots, to see that as a successful model and hearing those honest conversations of lessons learned, but they're rocking it. And in fact, the Orange County model is serving it's serving as a model where they're going to implement what lessons learned on a national level. And then responsiveness, really, I come from a fundraising background, raising money for unrestricted support, and that's another area where foundations can be very responsive, understanding the needs like trust-based philanthropy. Look, we know the work that you need to get done and how to best service your clients and your constituents. We want to enable you to do your job. And then also responsiveness. A lot of the foundations that I was working with to be even more responsive, we started doing electronic funds transfers instead of mailing checks during COVID. And again, to really be responsive, a lot of foundations during the pandemic stopped having their formalized process and really had more money available for discretionary giving. So again, they could get out the dollars a lot quicker.
That's really great. I appreciate those thoughts. And they're all important for us to take note of and think about. All of you have such very different backgrounds in how you approach philanthropy, the types of sources of funding that you have available to you, the mechanisms that you have available to you. Can you speak just briefly, and we'll start with you, Sarah, and come back, to sort of who you work with and how you support them and enable them to make change in the community? Like, so what does your day look like? Who do you work with? What sort of issues do you face as a person working to support this philanthropic mechanism?
Okay, I'll try to be concise. So I work a lot with private family foundations. So each of my client is its own private family foundation with its own 501c3, and each are responsible for their 5% minimum distribution requirement, which is based on the average asset size over the last 12 months, which is why I was surprised by the giving statistic of foundation giving is down, and I'll get back to that. So at the beginning of the year, we set forth the grant budget. Each foundation has its mission and vision statement, and so I work alongside with them to, in essence, be the matchmaker, trying to find nonprofits or collaboratives that fit within their mission. And I'm always, a lot of you know me, I know a lot of you, constantly meeting nonprofits, understanding what new nonprofits are out there, and really understanding the needs. I really enjoy having conversations with nonprofits to learn. Some foundations meet twice a year, some foundations meet 4 times a year. In terms of the budget, they have core funding where they're coming together as a family to decide, okay, where should we collectively as a family give? Some of them give strategic grants, so really RFPs and really driving that force to make a difference. And then they also have a pool of discretionary funds. So each board member might have their own passion that may be outside of the mission statement, but they're able to feel part of the community and give to where they need, which is really particularly important to family foundations because that helps future generations to want to be involved in the family foundation.
Wonderful, very helpful. Heather, same question, how do you engage? How does it work for you in the work that you do, and what kind of funding do you help generate for philanthropy, or for the nonprofit sector?
Sure. So I'm going to go back to the collaborative model. I lead a group called Housing for Health OC, and it is made up of 4 local nonprofits here in the county. They're homeless service providers. They're American Family Housing, Mercy House, Friendship Shelter, and Jamboree. And they brought me in to create this model way back in 2019, and this was really a very intentional sort of drive that the 4 of these organizations came together and said, okay, we have this homeless crisis that's growing in this county, and none of us can tackle it individually, but collectively we can scale up, we can expand capacity, we can learn from each other, and we all do something slightly different, right? They were all just a little bit different, but enough of a common core mission to drive them together. And so we set off in 2019 to really drive a sustainable homeless service model in this county, and we did so. We entered into a master service agreement with the County of Orange right before the pandemic hit, and we thought that was going to be a pilot program to house about 100 people and keep them housed. Lo and behold, we housed over 400 people in almost 2 years. And that model took us into now a major statewide regulatory program that's implemented in every county. And so when we talk about being able to replicate these models, we think we can replicate this model in other counties and drive them to success. And so when we look at this, we look at funding from both the public perspective of where is the policy? Policy is driving us here, and funding's driving us right now. There's more money coming into our system than has ever been known before. So we want to align those funds with the appropriate policies, which is not always easy, but worthy, because that's where the system change comes from. And then we work with private funders to help us build the backbone infrastructure to lift this up. Because it's not easy, it's much easier for the nonprofits to go back into their sort of siloed homes and work, just say, this is mine, I'll compete against you, we'll go up against the next grant together. Instead, these 4 executives really had this vision to say, we can serve this county so much better, and we can drive system change by working together. And it's truly taking every single dollar we can pull in to both give us the backbone infrastructure and to drive this policy system change that we're working towards. So we very much look at this holistically from both the public and the private funding sources.
Wonderful, thank you. How about you, Rita?
So I lead the efforts of our Latino Giving Circle network. This is a network that is embedded in the Latino Community Foundation. We have right now 20 circles across the state of California. And here in Orange County, we actually have an Orange County Latino Giving Circle. And the way our model, how does it work, right? So each of the circles decides their funding priorities at the beginning of the year. And then through a process, they decide organizations that are going to come and pitch for funds in what we call grants night or the magical night. So each of the members, the only thing you can do is you have to give at least $1,000 a year. If you want to give more, that's fine, but everybody has the same, the same vote and the same seat at the table when they make decisions on how to allocate these funds. So our circles have given grants that go from $5,000 to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for an organization. But the real magic in this process is that they know these organizations better than anyone because they're part of the community. So for example, with our Orange County Latino Giving Circle, we have members of, family foundations, we have people that are working in, the nonprofits, but we also have entrepreneurs, business people, and they understand what the Latino community needs in this location. So they're not only growing in their philanthropic endeavors and their philanthropic persona and building what they want to, how they want to present themselves in terms of their philanthropic profile, but they're also building with the community. So what happens is really magical because it's not only the 5,000 grant, that in many cases it's really life-changing for some of these grassroots organizations that are often invisible for the donors, but it's also the process where they gain that visibility because members of the community are working alongside with them. And then what happens to the donor is that they are leveraging their expertise as donors. So a lot of them become much more civically engaged because they start to get to know the problems of the community at a different level. Many of them start building what they want to pass on to their families in terms of generational wealth and how they're going to also provide a help for their communities that is sustainable in time. So really with this model, this is our 10 year. We're celebrating 10 years of, just enabling circles across California, more than 500 members mobilized, over $3 million just in grants. And I think most importantly is bringing that new infrastructure to a type of philanthropy that didn't have a home before. And so we're really excited about also how these transversally connect with all of the work that we do as a foundation, our civic engagement work, our economic justice and recovery funds. And the reality is that our circles are just the best representation of who we are as a community and how do we work and how generosity is really part of, who we are as Latinos. That's a little bit of what we do.
Yeah, thank you. And Nate?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. So, I prior to coming to Orange County, I was working at the Gates Foundation, a very well-endowed organization. And, one of the things I learned is that despite all the money in the world, we literally, if we can make a rationale, we could put any kind of money against a problem. It really took cross-sector collaboration to, is where we had the most success, is when we were able to work with the private sector, government sector, broader nonprofit, NGO sectors. So I take that, I take that sort of mentality here, and there are two ways that I spend most of my time, my average day. One is sort of internal and external advocacy, and the second is working directly with partners, problem solving. So as it relates to advocacy, we're working a lot on trying to figure out how we can get other companies like ours to care about the issues we care about and to really speak about our partners and the important work they're having. Because we see them as potential funders and also organizations that can use their voice, whether it be on the lobby front, which is a word I don't say much, but they can lobby. I can't in my foundation hat. But they really can pull some strings and some levers to really help get at some of the systemic barriers to some of the challenges we're working on. From an internal standpoint, so we're the PIMCO Foundation is funded by our partners, the managing directors at PIMCO. These folks don't just give to the PIMCO Foundation. They're incredibly generous outside of the context of PIMCO. And I can tell you just by a matter of fact that I've marshaled more funds in the last 2 years from helping my colleagues with their private giving than I do through the PIMCO Foundation. We give out about $10 million or so a year, just as a PIMCO Foundation. So, being able to introduce them to partners and let them know about the amazing work that's happening in their backyards is just been incredibly impactful, not just for them, but for the organizations that to whom they ultimately give. And just on the last part, it's really important for us to not just be funders, but to be partners. As we saw on the list, we have shared challenges: DEI, retention, and hiring. There's just so many things we share. We can be true partners in solving these problems, and so I spend a lot of time now. Every day, I have multiple calls with partners around problem solving and helping them, think about how they can build their capacity to do their best work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was just eye-opening to me when you said the philanthropy that you have the opportunity to leverage among your partners and those in the firm beyond just the giving that's available through the PIMCO Foundation. That's something that we should all be mindful of, right? That you are an advocate in many ways beyond just the limitations of corporate philanthropy. And I would imagine, too, that you can introduce folks to potential organizations where they might become a board member of the future or something like that. So it's powerful leverage and not something that I really even thought about very frequently. So what an amazing opportunity you have. Each of you in your roles has an opportunity to accomplish significant change. I think that's what you're motivated to do. It's probably why you do the work. Like, let's make something good happen. How do you, in the work that you do, evaluate success? Like, how do you know something is successful? What kinds of things do you most often celebrate and feel like, yes, I did something great today? Or what does success look like in the roles that you have? And Raida, let's start with you.
With me?
If you don't mind. I got to mix it up a little bit.
I am.
And you looked at me like you were ready, like, this is great, okay. So if I misinterpreted that.
The thing is that with social innovation, when it comes to metrics, there are so many ways of measuring success. For us, and specifically with the work that we do with our Giving Circle Network, success is when our donors and our grassroots organizations are finding new connections. When we know that a grant is helping an organization gain visibility. It's when we celebrate our Latinidad and what our community is all about. It's when we serve as advocates for the issues that our communities are struggling with. When the pandemic started, and this is really special because it was our Giving Circles, the first that were calling the foundation and saying, how much money do we have and how do we make sure that money gets to our nonprofits right now? And the Orange County Giving Circle was one that was really committed to do that. And we really, it was a lot of lessons that we were learning and also a lot of new stories that we, as a foundation, needed to communicate as part of our success. I think, in this era where collaboration and partnerships are at the essence, at the center of the work that we do, measuring has to have a component of those numbers that are really attractive and the percentages and the dollars, but also the storytelling. And for us, that's very important. And also, how do we connect our strategies as a foundation so that what we do with one program serves what we do with another. For example, we have an accelerator, a nonprofit accelerator program. We're very excited that we have in this cohort Accord here in Orange County. And the reason why this is important is because some of these organizations became visible to us through our Giving Circle network. And then what we notice is that a lot of them struggle with the basics. You know, these organizations are doing the work that no one else is doing. But what they need is much more tools to be able to do what they do better and to have a deeper impact. So that's when we created programs like our nonprofit accelerator that is just, you know, bringing that mentality of Silicon Valley and resources and rethinking and asking to nonprofits. And that is what success looks to us, is when we, you know, when we start looking at nonprofits as essential for the economy, as essential for our community development. So, yeah.
Sarah, how do you evaluate success? How do you know you've gotten a win? Or
I'm going to share a couple of stories for this one, but really it's transformational gifts. I mean, that really could take on so many different forms, and maybe it's piloting a program that's successful that can be replicated across the state, across the country. And this also ties back into the earlier question of how we work with clients. But one of the foundations, we met with a local children's hospital, and we're trying to understand, you know, the trend that there's less specialty doctors, there's less researchers. And so they started funding a fellowship program to you know, get, like, if it's the NBA draft, you know, get like these drafted research professionals funds that they wouldn't have the funds available to do this incredible research. And we were funding this for 4 or 5 years, and every year we'd go to the hospital and hear from these 4 fellows about this great groundbreaking research that they're doing. And so that is a great impact story because they had a particular focus and bridging the needle of health and cancer research. And so that was a huge success. Another success for me personally is working with clients and engaging the next generation to train them to become board members and to get them excited about you know, the responsibility and joys of being part of a family foundation. And so with one of our clients, we had incredibly poised young woman who is in her first year at college, and she really wanted to have a meaningful internship opportunity, and she was really interested in education. And so I called up a local nonprofit and I said, what can we do to create a special internship that will be meaningful to Maddie? And she drafted, you know, she worked with them all along summer. I saw her Instagram stories, super excited. She understands the needs of the nonprofit, what it takes to raise money, but more importantly, that the impact this nonprofit is having on the community. The foundation had an RFP for a strategic grant. This particular nonprofit applied. Maddie conferenced from Texas, where she's going to school at the board meeting, and she advocated on their behalf as to why they should get funding. Parents are super proud. Maddie is a rock star, and the nonprofit got the strategic grant. So if you want a way to really engage philanthropy, engage the next generation.
Wonderful. That's great. And Nate, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
how do you measure success in the work that you do?
So, I mean, we wouldn't be PIMCO if it weren't all about numbers
That's right.
and data,
Good call.
KPIs.
I shouldn't have even asked. Right,
Yeah.
right.
So we definitely have our share of those. Though I'll note that, you know, we work really hard to right-size them and try to take advantage of the other reporting that our partners do, so that it's not, you know, just extra work for PIMCO. I still think we have some ways to go, but I know we've gotten a lot better at that. But it's certainly sort of the realization of KPIs and hitting targets. You know, that's something that we celebrate big time internally. I think an area for growth for us is actually celebrating that with our partners who submitted those data and hit those targets. I think there's a huge opportunity to really just share that with them and because a lot goes into that. I sort of had this crisis recently where I was thinking about the enormity of the challenges and, the relatively little impact that, at least speak for ourselves, that we were having even, and I'm just thinking, how in the world are we going to eradicate hunger, or, for example, or economically empower, all the women and girls in the world. But then I had a few experiences where I got to do something that funders don't always get to do, which is to go and meet the clients that are being served by the nonprofits. And it became very clear to me that, every one of those lives matter. A child who is able to get a nutritious meal, we know their life outcomes will improve, exponentially. And if we can multiply that by 100, 1,000, million, then that's a huge impact. So, for me, I'm learning to celebrate the individual wins and those individual stories, because that will, keep the sort of motivation and drive to go after, the big stuff.
That's great.
Can I add something to that? I think, and that's when we have a lot to learn from nonprofits, because they're fantastic at building those stories that are engaging.
That's right.
And KPIs and numbers are important. We also have, everybody needs to have them, but we also need to be able to diversify the way in which we tell those stories so that they're meaningful, right? Just by hearing you and by hearing how impactful can a visit be, it just brings a completely different perspective. So for us, that combination of those numbers that have to be there, but then that piece of storytelling that connects you with the communities is essential. And I think we need to more and more explore and then, get helps from professionals in different scenarios, like journalists, producers, people that are building stories so that we can engage and we can present those numbers in a meaningful way.
That's great. Good. Yeah. Heather, how about you?
Oh my gosh, this is a good question. So, I get hired by individuals, organizations, and typically it's to fulfill an outcome. It's always a goal. I'm going to go back to the Homeless Services Collaborative, and we measure success over a variety of factors, and then we love sharing it with our funders, both public and private. But we set out very specific and high-level goals. So for instance, by the end of this year, we have a goal to serve not less than 1,000 chronically homeless individuals. We're going to meet that goal. We're right at about 650. Not only do we want to serve them and take care of them and hold their hand through all of their trauma, but once we house them, which is our ultimate goal, we need to keep them housed. And we set a very high bar for ourselves that we would do that and make sure that those individuals were housed for at least a year. And we measure those goals and we talk about it on a quarterly basis. We run our data, we pull our data, we look at our 12 hardest cases. Where did we lose someone? What happened? How do we pivot? And then we go back to our funders and we talk about it. We're very transparent. This is where we had success. This is where we had failure. And I think, we just work towards these outcomes sort of day and night, and data tells a story. I can't underscore how important it is to track your data, to monitor your data, to have an open conversation about where you are with your outcomes, and be willing to make those system changes that drive you to better outcomes. And you have to be very honest with yourself as a nonprofit, and oftentimes with your funders. Look, we ran into a major snag here, and if we realign this or tweak this, we're going to achieve what we set out to achieve. So I think it is this funder nonprofit partnership that can drive those outcomes. But I definitely I'm a big believer of data tells the story. Sometimes not always the story you want, right? But if you're willing to be honest with yourself, that's where you can really, I think, make improvements, and then you get to celebrate all those outcomes. And we'd like to do that more together too. I think that would be really important for our, driving success and the relationships between nonprofits and their funders is to celebrate more. We're all so busy just kind of running on that hamster wheel trying to do what we do. But do we stop to share the stories? Do we stop to celebrate those successes? Probably not enough.
Mm-hmm. Never enough, right, never enough. One of the questions we asked the morning panel of board members was what good has come out of the last couple of years? Been a transformational time for all of us, organizations and the world. But there's good that always comes out of trying times, and I'd love to ask from your perspective and the work that you do, what some of the good is that has come out of the last couple of years in your environment, in the work that you're doing. And maybe I start with you, if that's okay.
I think it's the mindset shift, right? It's that perspective, thinking of everything is possible, and how can we prepare, and how can we just create based on the struggles. I think we saw it when the pandemic hit. It sparked creativity in our thinking as a foundation, but also in how our circles were thinking, in how we were responding. And I'll say that agile mentality, right? That design thinking perspective into the projects that we develop, and creating with those that are in the communities and building with them, and then piloting and seeing, what are the things that work, what are the things that do not work, and how do we change as we go. I think that is probably for us what we saw growing exponentially, that creativity mindset and that responsiveness of our community. And I think what you were saying, sometimes we don't often take the time to celebrate, sometimes we don't often take the time to reflect. And I think that's very important. That is something that we were forced to do with the pandemic, right? What's working, what's not working, how do we move forward with what's working, and how do we stop the things that right now are not a priority? So, yeah.
Great. And Sarah, what are you seeing, the good that you're seeing coming out of the pandemic?
Definitely the ability to pivot quickly. The responsiveness I've seen among the nonprofits has just been amazing. Oh, we can't have children in school? Okay, we're gonna start teaching kids online in very creative ways, sending them kits so they still have that tactful learning and they're inspired, and just having more, I see more community conversations of trying to solve problems together, and really it's that collaboration and partnership of, okay, what can we do, what can we offer, how can we band together to really charter during these unprecedented times. And just the responsiveness, I think that really is it. There's been struggle after, I have had many conversations with nonprofits. During the pandemic, it just seemed like things were constantly changing. There was a roadblock, but it was that persistence and grit of the nonprofit leaders that really carried us through. So actually, I want to give a hand to all of the nonprofit leaders out there.
Totally appropriate. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Heather, what about you? What have you seen? The green shoots.
I think that it took the veneer off of everything. We actually got to see our communities for what they were and the need. It was always there, but before the pandemic, it was sort of tucked away, and we really didn't see this massive need. And we talked about equity a little bit, and I think that is one of the best things that really, I think, has emerged, is this massive conversation around equity. And what does that mean to really invest in our communities where they need it? And how do we do that and do it much more thoughtfully than we've ever done it before? Because the challenges are so severe and they just continue to increase. It's as hard as we're all working, I think we all are feeling like, wow, we've got some big stuff to grapple out there. And I really see that it's open, it's transparent. We're all finally having, I think, really tough discussions, and people are leaning in. They're leaning into problem solving. They're leaning in with financial resources, and we're saying, okay, how do we tackle this as a community? So I've just quite enjoyed sort of watching all of that mature and I think come to light.
That's great. Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with my fellow panelists. And I'm going to add focus on wellness. I think that there's a humanity that I think we see in each other now that we didn't necessarily acknowledge up front. So, I can't tell you how many of my conversations begin, on calls or meetings, like, how are you? How's your family? And genuine, dialogue about, people striking the balance of, work and life. I mean, as you said, there's not enough time in the day. We're all pushing super, super hard, but remembering that we, are all in a juggling act. So that, to me, it just is something that I really appreciate, and it's in all the conversations I have.
Yeah, so important. And especially for philanthropy, where people authentically care and are concerned about the well-being of their friends, their donors, their clients, and everything. So it's so true. It's such a good
You definitely see that snowball. To your point, Nate, is in the pandemic, there was all this focus on children's wellness, and then it kind of morphed into the adults and the service workers, the medical workers that are providing care, that are seeing things that we don't even want to imagine, and a family and loved ones not being there, and then as a medical professional not, having to be that family member for those people, and then people stopping and pausing and saying, look, we have to take care of the nurses and doctors because they're going through a lot. And so it definitely is that point where people truly are caring what's going on with that person, whether they're performing bad work or good work in dire circumstances, but not only that, being on a Zoom call and seeing someone's dog, so, there's been kind of, it's kind of built community in a way that we've had to build community.
Great. Well, we've got 2 more minutes, and then we're going to adjourn. So last question for each of you, if you could do a quick answer to the question about advice. All of these are fundraising professionals that are actively trying to engage and find partnerships and seek support for causes that are really near and dear to them and to the community. What advice would you offer the group, a takeaway that they can take with them on their way back to the office or home or wherever it is? So why don't we start with you, Sarah, and we'll just go down the line and we'll wrap it up.
I would say using your board members to leverage those relationships, and then when you're having site visits, invite a collaborative partner, or make sure your clients are there on the site visits, and trying to make it open to people's children so that they can be involved and kind of learn of the great work that you're doing, because really it's building relationships from generation to generation.
Yeah, I would just tee off the relationship. I think, even in this state of, hybrid work and, where we are, and it's still a little weird, we have to continue to build relationships. I always feel I was so fortunate that the pandemic hit, and 25 years into my career, I don't know how kids out of college were making that work. So we have to keep driving relationships and working together.
Great.
I'll say where there's no infrastructure that serves your work, don't be afraid to create a new infrastructure. Don't be afraid to ideate with your partners. Don't be afraid to, just create what works for you. I think the Giving Circle movement, and in particular our network, is a result of that, we didn't find the support that we needed, and at that time our foundation was struggling to find resources. And so we created a new model and a new infrastructure, and 10 years later here we are, and it's an embedded and a transversal part of everything that we do at the foundation. So my invitation is just Don't be afraid to create. All of you know the communities more than anyone. You know the necessities. You know the benefits and the struggles. You see both sides. So whenever there's something that doesn't work, do it differently.
Yes, two quick things. One, be very clear about what the impact is that you're trying to go after. Like, there's a difference between outcomes or outputs and impact. So if you're training, youth or vulnerable women, it's not the program and the training that you're going after. You're actually trying to break the cycle of poverty. And I can't tell you how many times I work with nonprofits to shift how they sell their message because they're not talking about it in terms of the impact. And the second, and this is low-hanging fruit, and it shocks to me that more organizations don't do it, is just aligning to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Like, make it super easy. Tell a funder that by investing in us, you will, put points on the board in these SDGs. I think even organizations that are hyper-focused locally want to know that they're part of a international movement. Even if they're not thinking about it, letting them know that that's part of the value proposition in partnership, I think is just, could be a quick win and gets people over the hump. So,
Awesome. Wow. So, Sarah, Heather, Raida, Nate, thank you for being with us and sharing. Everybody, big round of applause. We could stay here all day and learn even more. But thank you for being such an incredibly powerful and important resource in the community. And to all of you, thank you for being such an incredibly powerful and important resource in the community. Hope today was helpful to all of you. I no doubt expect to see you all very soon. And just a plug for AFP, stay connected, stay involved, and help us grow our connectivity in the philanthropic marketplace through the AFP Orange County chapter. So thanks for all coming, and look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day.